Addiction is going to be when there is a loss of control, there's compulsion. And I have suffered from this tremendously during certain points of my life, especially with sweets and sugars. It's as if I just couldn't say no. Hi, it's Dr. Casoni. Today we're going to talk about cravings. I did a post regarding the Appestat, and a lot of people were interested in how that relates to our cravings and our feeling of satiation when we eat or don't eat. The Appestat basically is in the brain. You can think of it as a feedback loop between the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the rest of our body, including even the fat cells and the stomach. Hormones like ghrelin and leptin are part of this feedback loop. And these hormones dictate whether or not we're satisfied after eating or whether or not we're still hungry. In this video, I'm going to cover 5 principles on how to affect the Appestat. Because if you can treat the Appestat and have it working better, then you're going to have a far easier time managing what foods you're eating. Choice is returned to you versus food addiction. Addiction is going to be when there is a loss of control, there's compulsion. And I have suffered from this tremendously during certain points of my life, especially with sweets and sugars. It's as if I just couldn't say no. And even currently, even though I don't eat sweets, I haven't had sweets or desserts in my diet for over 15 years. That's not something I ask of patients. That's just a personal decision I made because the cravings were so high and I was in the field, so I felt demoralized that I couldn't control myself. So I gave up all of those foods. I have not had a cookie or a cake or ice cream in over 15 years. I've had fake cookies, but they're really not the same, like stevia cookies. Those really don't have any pull on me. But I gave up those foods because the cravings were so high that I would literally tell myself no, and then I would eat one, and then I'd eat a whole box of Girl Scout cookies or something. I would literally lose control and even binge, and I felt demoralized, and it was an awful experience. So upon giving all those foods up 100%, I didn't mean to do it forever, but it was so priceless when the cravings left me that I never went back. And to this day, I have no interest in sweets. I just don't eat them. Holidays, special occasions, I'm not even tempted. It's almost like the way some ex-smokers describe a cigarette. They can't stand the smell. So that's me with sweets. But nonetheless, what are we working on to try to get reduction of regular foods, the cravings of regular foods, so that we're not overeating? Currently, if my Appestat is balanced, then if somebody orders food that normally I might have a craving for, like pizza or chips or something, I'm fine. I'm able to have self-control and it's effortless. If my Appestat is out of balance, then that's going to be hard to manage. And I don't like that at all. I do not like managing my cravings. I can't stand it, to be honest with you. I can't stand the feeling of thinking about the food, trying too hard, only to then have some and then have more, right? I say I'm not going to have that slice of pizza that Dominic ordered, and then I end up having a slice, and then I have 2 slices, and then I'm upset at myself that I lost control. I have learned that I actually cannot control my cravings if my Appestat is out of balance. If my Appestat is in balance, it's no problem. He orders the pizza, and I'm like, hey, it's not my time to have that kind of food. I still have those foods, but I make sure that my Appestat is balanced so that when I enjoy those foods, they're like my cheat meals. I can visit the land of pizza, but it doesn't trigger the cravings, right? That's one of the reasons that I know I'm getting away with it, right? If I start to eat too many high carby foods, I want to know that I'm getting away with it. I'm not going to get bloated or gut irritation. I'm not going to get fat or dysglycemia or blood sugar balancing issues. So ideally, I have some pizza. I didn't crave too much. I didn't overeat. And then I go back into my week, which is typically a low carbohydrate week, and I'm not even thinking about it. That's ideal. And that requires an Appestat that is dialed in. Okay, so the Appestat is pretty complex because there's so many factors in the body that can affect it. But let's cover 5. So the first one we're going to look at is actually blood vessel inflammation. Yeah, blood vessel inflammation. Now, if anything is inflaming your blood vessels, it's going to create a reaction in the body. Now, historically, we know sugars can stay in the blood vessel too long and cause a diabetic like reaction. That's why lowering carbohydrates is really so useful for so many people. They're lowering the sugars, irritating their blood vessel, and then that spike of insulin calms down. See, it's not a normal response. If the blood vessels are not inflamed, you will take those carbohydrates and put them into the furnace where they belong so you feel great. Or if you overate, you'll tuck some of that away in the liver as glycogen and store it for a little bit later, but there's no overreaction. If those sugars stay in the blood vessels for too long, there's going to be an inflamed blood vessel, and then the body will overreact. And at that point, it might not be that you're eating too much food or whatever kind of food, but now you're having an abnormal reaction to it. And the starting point was blood vessel inflammation. Now, the challenge here is that sugars are not the only thing that can inflame the blood vessels. More recently, in my 5 stages of COVID video, I explained how the spike protein from COVID irritates the blood vessels, causing an overreaction to other foods like carbohydrates. It's like a hybrid diabetic-like reaction, but the theme is still blood vessel inflammation. I've also mentioned to many of you personally, my gut issues from many years ago caused a lot of like leaky gut, blood vessel inflammation through that route, but it made me spike insulin and gain weight disproportionate to the food I was eating and my exercise expenditure. And that's what this is all about. It's an abnormal reaction. You're not eating too much, you're mishandling what you're eating. So in a private session, my job is to figure out if there's blood vessel inflammation, what the cause of it is, and to treat that so that the lining of the blood vessels is healing and the inflammation is going down, and then we can balance the Appestat through that route. Number 2, which is related to number 1, is going to be your blood sugar levels, or more accurately, your blood sugar fat levels, right? Because we're basically like a Toyota Prius. We're going back and forth between those two major fuels. Protein is not an ideal fuel. It's very good for building structure and muscle, but your primary fuels are going to be fats and sugars. If you run up a hill, you're going to burn sugar. Doesn't matter if you're on a low carb diet. If you don't have a lot of sugar in your body will make sugar, because sugar is a fast acting fuel. If you were a sprinter, you might want your body to be used to burning sugars. It's not all bad, but for a lot of us, if we're sitting all day and we have some vessel inflammation, then we're not using those carbohydrates. And so there could be a problem there. We sprinkle in the vascular inflammation, turn that up a little bit, and now we're pushing insulin to remove harmful irritants from the blood. And now sugars, which are irritating, are starting to be driven out of the bloodstream too quickly. They're either going to go all at once into the furnace, causing kind of an ADHD like experience. That's certainly how I used to be. And then as the receptors in the cells kind of shut down, which is called insulin resistance, then the person's going to be gaining weight and or urinating more frequently or urinating at night. Point is that the insulin in that upper range is preventing access to the fuel. So now you're also still hungry, right? You're having, instead of a steady fuel line that involves a switch like that healthy Toyota Prius going between fats and sugars, instead of being smooth, it's more like peaks and valleys, spikes and drops. You're eating something and then you're crashing. That's the tired after you eat. And that crash is reactive hypoglycemia. You push too much insulin because you got irritated from the food, and then it took it out of your bloodstream so quick you didn't get access to it. It turned it into a fat cell, and then now you're still hungry. So balancing out that vascular inflammation is related to principle number 2, which is balancing the blood sugars, right? We want that Toyota Prius to be shifting gears between sugars and fats nice and smooth. You run up the hill, you burn sugars, you get to the top of the hill, you switch to fat burning. Instead, once this is broken, a broken Toyota Prius, you're craving carbs because you're in that constant fuel crash. Well, you're actually mishandling carbs. And then because your body's at a deficit, it's making the carbohydrates. You'll see this with people at night. They're going to bed and making sugar to get through that night because they're fasting all night, but they don't burn fat very well because the whole system is highly reactive and sensitive. So you'll wake up and check blood sugars and they're higher than what you went to bed with. That's because the vessels are still inflamed and the body's not burning fat to get through the night. So it has to make that sugar. Now, in this second category, I do want to add the rest of the endocrine system because we have the insulin, which is coming from the pancreas. We have the hypothalamus and pituitary that have to be taken into consideration because that part of the brain runs all the rest of the hormones. We have the thyroid that's involved there and the adrenal glands. So think of number two as fuel management, but you're also dealing with hormones like insulin, hormones like glucagon, which are going to pull fat and turn them into usable energy. We want that one. And the balancing act that involves the accessory endocrine producing, hormone producing glands that I just mentioned. So number one, we're looking at blood vessel inflammation. Number two, we're looking at the blood sugar fat stability and the hormone system that regulates it. Number three, I would say the liver directly. The liver is massive in this department. The liver is not only decreasing particulates in the blood that may cause inflammation and trigger number one and two that we just talked about, but the liver is the gatekeeper to the healthy Toyota Prius. The liver is where you produce sugars should you produce them. The liver is also where you're going to convert fats into usable energy. So a congested liver that has a functional issue where it's not keeping up with the demand of filtration and cleaning the blood or fuel regulation is going to be part of this dilemma. And if you manage the liver, you're going to sleep better at night. You're going to not wake up at 2, 3 in the morning. We talked about the liver hour. You're going to balance the blood sugars more easily. You're going to decontaminate the blood vessels from inflammatory causing agents. So the liver is definitely big on the list. But remember, I'm generalizing here. Each patient is different. That's why we need a intake so we can decide where to start, what we're working on. Okay, number 4 is the gut. Now, the gut was my issue. That's where my cravings, my weight gain, because leaky gut, I'm sending in particulates into the bloodstream that should be filtered out through that small intestine. You got 22 feet of small intestines, and the route from the small intestines goes right to the liver. So if you have gut irritation, the way I did for years, you're going to eventually be passing on junk that should be filtered out, goes to the liver. Well, now you got liver issues. Now you got blood vessel inflammation. And so I really ended up with like a hybrid diabetic pattern. I had a lot of the signs and symptoms of that diabetic weight gain and inflammation, but the labs aren't going to show it yet. That doesn't matter. We don't want to wait for the labs, right? We have patients who are 400 pounds and their labs look normal, but they're miserable. So we call it a hybrid diabetic pattern. It's still within that pattern. We're seeing the effect on the body of that high insulin and that bad reaction with the blood sugars caused by some sort of vessel inflammatory process. But in this case, it's the gut. Furthermore, the gut can host a transient flora infection. Now, we know we have a healthy microbiome. That's your resident flora. That's the stuff you keep that we try to build with probiotics and fermented foods. But if you get some weeds in the garden, then that's also going to be a gut issue. It's going to complicate that leaky gut phenomenon I just described, but also that flora requires food itself. And so it's typically carb and sugar dominant eating machine. And so it's going to be, it's like, do I want a bagel or do my critters inside my gut want the bagel? And so that's going to also challenge the cravings to where you are trying to restrict the bagel consumption, yet your body is saying, give me a bagel. So fix the gut as part of this. If the gut is there, once again, we do an individual intake so we understand what we're dealing with, and then we treat it. I would say the last one is going to be core deficiencies. So this is going to be any core deficiency that is going to be your body wanting that nutrient, but it can't find it in the food. Think of your animals or a dog. If you give them a kibble that's just poorly made and nutrient poor, they actually eat more, because they're looking for those core nutrients. The body needs to function. So it's like, well, keep eating. Like, we'll find it somewhere, but it's not finding it. So oftentimes we find that when we feed the person, we give them either good food in the diet or we're giving them those glandulars, right? So just like the postpartum cases I've talked about and the use of organ meats, I did a video on that you might want to watch, but those are one of the most dense forms of nutrition because those nutrients are pre-bundled. But nonetheless, it could also be as simple as vitamin or mineral deficiencies that can be handled by even increasing dark leafy green vegetables. Either way, somebody who's not getting those needs met because they've had too long of a period of time of eating junk food, which doesn't have really any nutrient value, then they're going to be hungry. And what the hunger is really is a branch of their deficiencies where the body's just trying to make up for those. So feed the body and you start to feel better. And those nutrients are low calorie. They're really, a lot of the foods that contain them are even low calorie. So it's really a matter of nutrients versus fuel going into the body. So we have macronutrients, which are going to be fats, carbs, and protein. Then we have micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals. Okay, so that's enough to think about for now. I will do more on this topic later. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. All right, bye.